The southern region of England had transformed into an enormous military encampment, teeming with hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Each of them was preparing for a mission that would change the course of World War II, the long-anticipated invasion of Nazi-occupied France. As the early summer months of 1944 approached, the Allied forces meticulously planned their assault on the Normandy beaches, a massive operation that had to succeed at all costs. Failure would mean catastrophe, with tens of thousands of lives lost and the war extended indefinitely. Ensuring the success of this invasion was not just a matter of military strength, but also one of deception. The British Security Service, MI5, had been tasked with the critical responsibility of misleading the Germans about the time, location, and scale of the attack. If the Germans were caught off guard and their defenses misdirected, the Allied forces would have a greater chance of securing a foothold in France. However, if MI5 failed, the consequences would be dire. Tens of thousands of Allied troops would face overwhelming enemy resistance and potentially be driven back into the sea. Thus, deception was not just a tactic, but a necessity. A harsh lesson had already been learned in August 1942, when the Allies launched an ill-fated raid on the French port of Dieppe. Seeking a much-needed victory in the midst of numerous military setbacks, Allied forces, primarily Canadian troops, attempted a bold amphibious assault on the heavily fortified coastline. The Germans, however, were fully prepared. What followed was a massacre. Nearly 4,000 Canadian soldiers were killed on the beaches, their bodies left as grim evidence of the operation's failure. This disaster made it abundantly clear that when the time came for the full-scale invasion of France, the Germans could not be allowed to anticipate it. If the defenders were ready and waiting, the invasion would be nothing short of a slaughter. Yet, keeping such a massive operation secret was a daunting challenge. Within just 90 days after the invasion, the U.S. Army alone planned to deploy an astonishing 1.2 million men, along with their tanks, artillery, vehicles, and supplies, into France. Concealing such a force was impossible. Instead, the Allies turned to deception, giving birth to Operation Fortitude, the most ambitious and sophisticated ruse in military history. The objective of Operation Fortitude was not to convince the Germans that an invasion would not happen. That would be absurd. Rather, the goal was to mislead them about the invasion specifics, where it would take place, when it would occur, and how many forces would be involved. To accomplish this, the Allies deployed a series of elaborate tactics designed to confuse, mislead, and ultimately deceive the German high command. False army groups were strategically positioned throughout Britain to create the illusion of multiple invasion points. One such fictional force was the British Fourth Army, which was supposedly stationed in Scotland, preparing for an assault on Nazi-occupied Norway. Another, even more ambitious deception involved General George S. Patton, one of the most respected and feared American commanders. Patton was placed in command of the entirely fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group, which was stationed along the English coast directly opposite Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, and the most logical invasion site from a geographical perspective. The Germans already believed that Pas-de-Calais was the most likely invasion target. The Allies simply had to reinforce this belief. But these deceptive armies needed to be convincing. The Allies had neither the time nor the resources to station actual divisions in these locations, as every available soldier was needed for the real invasion. Instead, they turned to Hollywood-style theatrics. The British film industry played a pivotal role in constructing the illusion, creating an elaborate dummy army complete with wooden aircraft, inflatable tanks, and over 250 fake landing craft. 2 entirely fictitious corps headquarters were established, generating a steady stream of radio communications that, to German intelligence, sounded like genuine military preparations. The deception was so elaborate that even King George VI played along, conducting an official inspection of the troops, which included rows of inflatable tanks and staged military exercises. To further enhance the illusion, MI5's 20 Committee, known as XX, a clever play on Roman numerals representing double cross, fed the Germans a carefully curated mix of false intelligence. This included both entirely fabricated reports and real information that was delivered just late enough to be useless. One of their most valuable assets was a Spanish double agent named Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. Over time, Garbo had cultivated an elaborate network of 27 fictitious subagents who continuously fed misinformation to the German intelligence services through their embassy in Madrid. His reports painted a convincing picture. The real invasion was coming to Pas-de-Calais, while any landings elsewhere, such as Normandy, were mere diversions. Garbo was so effective that the Germans awarded him the Iron Cross for his invaluable intelligence work, never suspecting that he was, in fact, working for the British. However, there was a significant risk. Even if the deception worked before the invasion, the moment Allied troops landed in Normandy, the ruse would be exposed. The Germans would swiftly redirect their full military strength to the beaches, potentially overwhelming the invasion forces. To counter this, the Allies devised additional deceptive operations to suggest that the Normandy landings were only the first of several planned invasions along the French coast. Maintaining secrecy was paramount. The Allied command implemented extensive security measures to prevent leaks. One particularly unusual initiative involved the British Women's Auxiliary Air Force. 30 members of this unit were sent to pubs near military encampments, dressed in civilian clothing. Their mission was to flirt with Allied soldiers and attempt to extract information. To everyone's relief, the soldiers kept their secrets, passing the test with flying colors. Despite these efforts, MI5 remained on edge. In 1942, an unsettling coincidence had occurred. The crossword puzzle in the Daily Telegraph newspaper featured the clue Dieppe just one day before the disastrous raid. Now, as D-Day approached, a series of alarming coincidences re-emerged. On May 2nd, the crossword included the clue one of the U.S., with the answer being Utah, one of the code names for the Normandy landing beaches. Soon after, Omaha, Mulberry, Overlord, and Neptune, all highly classified deed-related terms, appeared in the puzzles. MI5 interrogated Leonard Daw, the schoolmaster responsible for creating the crossword, only conclude that it was a bizarre and completely unintentional coincidence. Ultimately, the question remained, had all this deception worked? The Allies needed definitive proof that their efforts had successfully misled the Germans. The answer came through their ability to intercept and decipher German military communications. The Nazis relied on the Enigma machine to encrypt their messages, believing its complex codes to be unbreakable. However, thanks to brilliant minds like Alan Turing at Bletchley Park and the capture of an intact Enigma machine from a German U-boat in 1941, the British had cracked the code. Intelligence gathered from these intercepted messages confirmed that Operation Fortitude had worked beyond expectations. German commanders remained convinced that the real invasion would target Pas-de-Calais, even as thousands of Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. Their hesitation to redeploy forces allowed the Allies to establish a critical foothold in France, significantly contributing to the success of D-Day. As the battle for Normandy began, the deception efforts had already played a decisive role. Thanks to meticulous planning, extraordinary acts of bravery, and one of the most elaborate ruses in military history, the Allies had turned the tide of the war. The road to victory was still long and perilous, but the success of Operation Fortitude ensured that D-Day would not be repeated at Dieppe. It would be the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany.